for the agenda, it's going to be fairly efficient, we think. Of course, I'll just be speaking to provide a little bit of background on why we report. I'll then hand over to Alexi Lynch from Ironbark Sustainability to talk about how it is that we have this new integration with Snapshot and how it is that you can now report with the click of the button. And we'll then have a short demo from Matt Sullivan at Ironbark Sustainability, and of course, followed by those question and answer session. So just before we get into, or before I hand over to Lex and Matt, just a little bit about the who's who. It can be a little bit confusing when you've signed up to the Global Covenant of Mayors, and then there's these ICLEI people. Who is everyone? Essentially, the Global Covenant really is focused on mayors and local governments around the world, over 10,000 of them, that are pledged and committed to taking action and climate leadership in a way that is very much local action, that's very much globally connected. So ICLEI Oceania is the regional secretariat to the Global Covenant of Mayors. So two independent organisations, however, with a very close collaboration. ICLEI Oceania, of course, works on both climate action as well as accelerating sustainable urban development. So huge synergies, obviously, between the two. And then we also have CDP, who are responsible for really that, all the things data tracking and providing a unified platform for us to all sort of use and make sure that we can compare apples with apples and oranges with oranges, etc., to really understand what the data means and how it can then inform the gaps and opportunities regionally and globally in what we do. So good news is, through all these reporting platforms, the reporting platform used to be the CDP ICLEI Unified Reporting System. They have somewhat simplified that to now be called the TRAC. Also importantly, there's been a big process to also simplify the questionnaires. So there will actually be a webinar that's taking place on Tuesday, hosted by Global Covenant of Mayors globally. That's at 4 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. And you're also encouraged to join that or watch the recording of that so that you can sort of learn more deeply about some of those questionnaire changes. So just to touch on what cities get out of reporting. So really it's a huge thing in terms of course, improving your own climate strategy. So that process of actually going through to include your data to do that analysis and assessment is an opportunity for you to really enhance your own climate strategy and also draw attention to that from your elected members to across your city. It is an opportunity to, of course, show leadership and recognition through climate data and reporting. So things like, of course, the Global Covenant. We've recently last year also had a huge amount of momentum globally through the city's Race to Zero, which uses more science-based targets as well, which I'm sure you're hearing a lot about, and we will run webinars on this in the future. Anyway, so very important to have that locally led but globally connected leadership. Of course, there is a huge amount of data, stories and reports that are submitted via this data, which creates this incredible wealth of information, which is then used to inform reports. At the moment, we have a group of local government representatives from across Oceania who will soon be part of an IPCC, be part of the next process to inform the IPCC report and a summary for urban policymakers. So that's a really exciting way, of course, that the data is being used. You can also just really make sure that you're tapping into the city networks, sharing best practices and knowledge exchanges, having access to insights, tools and services, as well as increasing transparency and accountability. just to tap into the timeline, so yes, we are in May, so of course you've already received invitations to that the reporting system is now open, and we will be, of course, closing that system around about late July. You will, of course, receive feedback around about August on the information that you have submitted to make sure that it's all tickety-boo, and then of course final amendments and changes are submitted by the end of October for your badges to be awarded early in 2023. We do apologise that the badges were awarded a little bit late this year, and we'll be working to rectify that for 2023. Anyway, with that, I would like to hand over to Alexi Lynch, who will be able to introduce why it is that we can now report with one click of a button. Lex.
Hello, thanks, Jess. Let me share my screen before I do anything.
Sure thing. Oh, I see it.
Working? All good? Got the right version and all that? Awesome. Thanks, Jess. Thanks for having us. And hi, everyone. A lot of familiar faces here. Lovely to see a lot of you all again and some new faces. So welcome. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm working on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that this land was never ceded. Got a presentation here just to give a little bit of background to go through the barriers that we've faced, I guess, broadly as a sector around reporting and why it can be quite important, maybe interrogate that a little bit more and look at new ways that it could be valuable, and the solution. So what we've got to now, which is, I think, a pretty important step on the journey. We would like to see it easier, and we will continue to push to make it easier for everyone down the track. But what we've got at the moment is an update that will hopefully save a lot of time. And just a bit of a shout out, especially to Matt Sullivan, Bernie Cotter, Jess and Steve from ICLEI as well, who are in here today, who have been sort of pushing behind the scenes for this for a long time. And so you might only see us pop up every 3-6 months. There's a hell of a lot that goes on behind the scenes to sort of make this all happen. As Jess said, heaps of time for Q&A. At the end, keep it informal. I'll try and monitor the chat if there are any clarifying questions, but otherwise, we're going to have questions later as well. This is not new reporting. Councils in Australia have done it in the past. There was a time when we had 240 odd councils report to systems through the Cities Climate Protection Program. I think this might be becoming a common and well-known slide to many people out there, but just in case you don't know or you're a bit new to this, there has been times in the past where councils reported their operational or corporate emissions and their community emissions en masse. They were aggregated yearly so we could see where we were at, what we were doing as a sector. Unfortunately, this program kind of fell away about 10 years ago with funding that went, ironically, when the Rudd government came in, because of course the carbon pollution reduction scheme was going to help everything. But we do actually have this history of reporting in the past where we could see the value of it, and we had 84% of the Australian population living in areas that would report. So it's not actually new. There was a bit of a hiatus though until Paris and what was then called the Compact of Mayors, which was really a impetus to try and get councils to think about this again. So the Compact of Mayors, which is now called the Global Covenant of Mayors after merging with the Covenant of Mayors in Europe, forgive my terminology there. Basically, it was a program, a global program that said you need to do all these things. Submit an inventory or profile, have a target, an action plan. And for most councils in Australia, most of that was actually quite straightforward because we were trying to find some that could be really fast-tracked through this process in the lead up to the Paris COP. But the one thing that we didn't actually have anymore was this ability to have a greenhouse emissions inventory that was compliant with the global standard. So most councils didn't actually have that. Joondalup, Mornington and Port Phillip fast-tracked and developed this working with us and ICLEI. So we developed these profiles or community-wide inventories for them. and we're able to start to push some of those key barriers that had stopped reporting and stopped even tracking or determining community emissions. And so the lack of consistent, repeatable data and methodology was long a challenge. It was costly, it's pretty resource intensive, it was confusing at times, potentially still is, and there wasn't really the support structures, whereas in the past, there used to be a lot more support, on-call assistance to help councils get through it. This, of course, is where tools like Snapshot came in, and every council then had a profile. You could just jump on and you have an emissions profile or inventory, if you like, that is completely compliant with the relevant reporting protocols or standards. So the global protocol for community emissions or city emissions, and the GCoM reporting requirements. I will just quickly shout out to all those organisations that have been involved in Snapshot, because it is a public good tool that's out there, or what everyone can see, and has been ably and very awesomely funded by these guys. There's a new organisation on there, the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning in Victoria as well, that has jumped on board recently, which is great. But it's been a collaborative process. And so again, behind the scenes, whenever we've had a chance to say, get more data, we've worked with Google to get Environmental Insights Explorer data, linking the next stages potentially with actions and things like big databases of city action, working with not-for-profit organisations like Beyond Zero Emissions, importantly, making sure that it's available for everyone. And so all councils get it. And once we get better data in one area, we don't lift one, we lift all. And what we've also seen in the last couple of years is all the key city networks like ICLEI, Cities Power Partnership, Climate Emergency Australia, working really closely together and sharing information and data, which goes a long way. So we got this common framework, and we tried to sort of explain how it works. And it was interesting looking back at this process about 4 or 5 years ago. There's a few people who might have even attended these workshops to explain how you prepare a profile, a day-long session. And potentially in hindsight, it wasn't actually the best approach, because we actually don't need every single council in Australia knowing how to do it and getting their heads in that 150, 200-page document that looks at carbon accounting for community scale emissions. And so while it's nice to have that documentation there, potentially it's best to actually have it at a central level, and then everyone can just access it. And when you get the updates, you don't have 537 councils and people updating it, but you've got a group of partners that work together and provide the updates for everyone. Despite the fact that you had all these profiles, they were there, and you could look at them and say, hand on heart, this has been verified as compliant with the key global protocols, there hasn't been the ability to actually report. And so you haven't been able to go, right, I wish I could just use that and report it automatically. And what's often happened instead is that councils have laboured away themselves to try and get the data, and or work with consultants, work with us a lot of the time over the last few years. It's not work that we really love as well, trying to do the back-end information to navigate the Excel and CSV files and the CDP ICLEI track. I think that's what I heard it was called before, and try and make it work. It's a bit easy now, firstly, because as Jess alluded to, there are some broader changes. So they've removed a lot of the kind of, I think they've removed and reduced a lot of questions to make it a bit easier. But still, there's a fair bit of information that you need to get if you want to keep working and keep reporting. What we've been hearing pretty loud and clear is that councils have said, look, we don't report emissions. We don't even know what CDP is for a few of them, but a lot have said, look, we would do it if it was easier. Our understanding is that councils still do understand the benefits of reporting emissions. I think they've probably got a bit of a work to do there to try and explain it in easier terms and look at some of the broader benefits. But as far as disclosing where you are and where we are at, we expect that of corporates, we expect that of state and federal governments. So it's the sort of thing that potentially we should be really expecting of ourselves. It's also, as we improve data accuracy, a way to understand how we're tracking, whether we're actually meeting our goals, aggregating the ambition, sharing and learning, and also advocating for the work that we do as a sector to be sort of reflected in Australia's NDCs, or nationally determined contributions, which is something that I'll touch on in a second, which is a new little angle, I think, to this whole process. I'm going to go into even a little bit more detail on what councils have said, as well as, yes, we'll report if it's on Snapshot. from a webinar a couple of years ago in 2020. I don't know if Brett from Port Phillip is here. There's a lot of Bretts at Port Phillip, but this is one of them. And Brett provided some feedback along with a few other councils. You don't have to take this verbatim. I can send it on if you like post workshop. But I think it really summed up a lot of the sort of ideas and feedback and ways to try and make this a lot easier. Just saying, look, can we lift all the councils up, because it's near impossible at times to do this reporting ourselves. People talking about how not convinced that this bottom-up approach works. We certainly do want people understanding and reporting their targets and their actions, but when it comes to emissions, community emissions inventories or profiles, it is inherently complicated. And so maybe it's easy if there is this central sort of organisation or tool that we can all work on to report. This is also informed by sort of other council surveys, of course, the climate review from ICLEI and Ironbark last year that kind of talked about this being a barrier. I think one last point before moving into the solutions mode is this interesting one. Most people would be aware that Australia, having been a signatory to Paris, has to report and then update their nationally determined contribution. Put it simply, it's what we're going to do. This is what our target is, and here's how we're going to get there. One of the things that happens in Australia is that what happens for non-state actors, councils, states, and others, our ambition and our action and our emissions inventories, if you like, are not reflected in what happens at the federal level, basically because the government has said, no, we're not going to do that and not include that. And so there is a bit of a push from organisations like, or programs or networks like Better Futures Australia, which involves a lot of the key networks, to try and push and advocate to the federal government to say, this is what we're doing. And we know that if you look at all of the Australian local government emissions reduction targets at the moment, that it adds up to, I think now over 100% of the coalition's 2030 target and about 55% of Labor's 2030 target. And so we want that to be officially included to try and lift what's happening at the national level. To do that, first of all, I guess we need a bit of advocacy to make the feds hopefully understand. But second, we'll need a way to actually report it. And so we need to use platforms like CDP, ICLEI Track, or others that have been sort of already verified, given the tick of approval. So you can basically say, here are the 20, 30, or down the track, maybe 150 Australian councils. Here's our profiles, all verified. Here's our targets, and here's what we're doing. This is part of what our nation is doing. And so let's make sure there's no doubling up. Let's make sure there's no shortchanging what's happening at the other sectors. And let's try and lift the broader ambition of what's happening at the national level. All right. If you now jump into your CDP Track ICLEI platform, you'll see that we now have a reference or a few references to Snapshot. So as well as a simplification of the questionnaire, ICLEI and CDP have been working their backsides off with us to allow councils who want to automatically use your Snapshot inventory or profile as your preferred reporting method. You can now do so. So Snapshot was developed to try and do this, and also to make sure that even though we only see the simple high-level emission sectors up the top, behind the scenes, there's a lot of data and information that can be inserted into these sort of programs. And now we can do this. And ideally, this will help break some of those barriers down and make it easier for councils to actually report. It's really valuable to share these resources. And so when we see the city networks getting in the corners, we all kind of lose, but stepping back and seeing how everyone's been working together. Let's say, for example, when a new program comes on board, like Cities Race to Zero, again, they're going to include a lot of things around reporting and disclosing emissions. And this potentially was a challenge over the last year or so in the lead up to Glasgow. Not anymore. It's actually quite straightforward now. So we can use this for whatever the program, whatever you're reporting for. This is one of the options. Quickly, just to note, like there's the activity data, which is activity data is the stuff that sits underneath. Lots of spreadsheets and lots of CSV files and methodology and information that's well beyond my pay grade has all been there, but the challenge has been how we kind of get that into third party or into a format that works so it can be uploaded. And to think down the track too, there's a lot more data broader than just inventories and profiles. So for example, actions, targets, and forecasting. The main thing here is that there's the ability to generate the CSV file and press upload, which we'll go through in a second, and it's all automatically mapped. And also just want to make the point that, again, the data actually improves every year and often between years. And so you might not often notice what's happening on Snapshot as well, because most of the changes in emissions are going to happen because of better data and also because of national trends such as the decarbonisation of the grid. But it's always changing and always updating and always improving. There's an EOI that you can jump on after this. I will try and put this in the chat function and see if it works. If not, you can always check it out later. If you want to use this going forward, not everyone here has to report. Some of you will be due to report, but if you want to do it automatically using the data that comes from Snapshot, this is how you do it. There are two options. It's not free, and we'll take you through these options in a second. And I guess how and why we've got these costs here. But the first one is that we can go off and create the file. So it's in a CSV format and send it to you, and you, having perhaps done this before, or you'll need to set up your CDP account, can then do the rest. And you can import it, put it into your CDP, and you're done for reporting. The other thing is you can just say, you know what, I don't really want to have anything to do with this. So can you please create the file, upload it myself, and then just let us know when you're done. And so there's support throughout that whole process. That's there with the first option. Like it says no additional support because often these things don't work as planned, as many of you guys might know. And a little secret is that this often actually takes organisations like Ironbark a lot of time to do behind the scenes. And so I can see a lot of people here who have actually engaged us in the past to do this work. Second little secret, we don't love doing it. It's not the most fun thing in the world. So this is why we're trying to help to make sure it's automated as possible. This EOI is not committing to anything, and these aren't mandatory options. You can do it yourself. You can work with other consultants, whatever you want to do. This is just if you want to use the data from Snapshot, and this is based on the requests from, I guess, Australian councils to say, can we just make this a lot easier? In the immediate future, Matt Sullivan is going to take us through what you would do if you get that, if we generate that CSV file and send it to you. Hopefully it's going to be easy, but as I mentioned, there are often little challenges along the way, and we'll see if any of those come up while Matt's doing it. And I guess what's happening later, other than, you know, all the other broader Snapshot stuff that you're aware of around incorporating targets or actions, and whether or not that's part of Snapshot or tools that set side by side, is that we want to and have been working with CDP to use an API. So you actually then just log into your CDP account and click on fill or something like that, and it generates it all automatically. The conversation has begun with CDP and ICLEI, and it won't happen before at least March next year, but that's what we're trying to do. So this is an interim step, I guess, where you can actually click with the one report, but with one button, but ideally it's going to be even more automated. Whether or not that happens or not will depend on things like costs. It depends on who comes to the party with funding. So it is user pay at the moment to do this version, because there's no state, federal or philanthropic funding that's really obvious there to help with reporting of emissions. Funnily enough, reporting emissions profiles isn't the most sexy fundraising pitch, but we're certainly working on it behind the scenes. But in the meantime, what we've got is a model where we can just make sure that we're still keeping the systems maintained and the data's okay to generate the reports, to make it a lot easier than what it used to be, which is a lot of councils doing it themselves or coming to us and doing one-off quotes for $2.5 or $3,000. The other thing is that we will be getting more granular data if and when key players come to the party. So as people might be aware, we now have, for example, the Google Transport data for, I think now about 200 odd of Australian councils, but there are still big challenges working with distribution businesses who might not necessarily come to the party. If you download that if you fill in that EOI, we've actually got a question for you to see if you want to be involved in a bit of advocacy to try and push a little bit harder to try and get that data and unlock that data, because we know it's there and we'd love to be able to include it, incorporate it within this and within tools like Snapshot. And I know that the DELP in Victoria is helping us support that. So fingers crossed we'll see some news on that now. Before I finally get to Matt, just want to mention, I guess, that we are going to continue doing this regardless behind the scenes. So thanks to those guys who are involved. And just again, you come to these sessions and you speak at these, you give us feedback and info like Brett did, and a year or two later, it can come to fruition. So we do listen to it, and it actually is what forms, I guess, the approaches that we make. It's taken a little bit more time than we would have liked, but it just makes so much more sense, and it builds the case when we get that kind of feedback to say, this is the issue, this is what we're having trouble with, can you please fix it? And so when you are filling out those little brief annoying surveys, even at the end of these webinars, it really does help, and we can see that down the track, working with all of the key stakeholders. And bring this up a little bit, especially when talking about profiles, because it is just the start. We then need to move on to action. But again, behind the scenes, all this stuff does happen to try and make sure that we've got easier and better ways, not just to report your inventories and profiles, but everything else out there, sharing climate actions and interventions to make sure that we as a sector are putting our time and money in the areas where it's actually going to make the most difference, and not throwing good money and resourcing after bad. Matt Sullivan-Kilgore is now going to take us through the file. What would happen if you get it? If we send it through to you, one click saves you about 100, used to be 160 data points, I think, that you used to do. Matt is Ironbark's head of data analytics, but it probably undersells him a bit because he is the brains behind tools like Snapshot and has an unflinching approach to making sure that we've got solutions that work at scale. And I mean the scale that the problem demands, to make sure that we are being as efficient as possible as a sector. Matt, I'm going to pass to you unless I can see any questions in the box. No, I can't. So what I'm going to do is stop sharing and pass over to you. Kat, you're not going to miss the Cirrus spreadsheet.
That's such a good spreadsheet.
So I guess
they've done a really good job on it. It's tough. It's tough what yeah.
As Matt will go through, and my passing on to you now is that he'll show you what it's like. And when I say this is something we don't really love doing, yeah, the Cirrus spreadsheet, and before then the CCR spreadsheet, doing the best they can. As technology improves, we all get better, but it's not fun. That's why we're trying to do these things. Matt, over to you.
Hi. So I'm just going to do a bit of a walkthrough about the submission of the file. So I prepared a little document which does a walkthrough, and I'll actually forward it to Lex because he likes to jazz it up. But the file basically is just a walkthrough of what I'm just about to walk through right now. So I'm just going to share screens, assuming I can share screens. So can everyone see that now? Yeah, great. All right, so we just sign in, which is just in the corner here, and we enter in your login details. If you don't have your login details, then CDP is really good with helping out with that, and I think Equally can probably lend a hand as well. In there, just scroll. So this is your dashboard. It's an excellent dashboard, by the way. It's really good, very, very consolidated mapping of a lot of the initiatives available today. I strongly recommend exploring it. Scroll down to cities 2022. And here is just some details about some of your participation in this program. We'll enter the questionnaire. This brings up a new tab, and which maybe you're seeing this new tab, or maybe you're seeing the old tab. Which one are we seeing?
It says questions answered, and it's like a little blue line the way across. It says complete track 2022.
See, yeah, great. Okay, so it did move. Okay, terrific. All right, so then once you're in this new tab, then click navigation. And then then you click assessment. All right, so then what we have here is we have the capacity to import answers. So just in the top here, from this point, you select the file that you've been provided, which is just this one here, which is the one we've got. Now, this is important because this will differentiate whether or not this actually uploads. So what we are doing in this instance is we're uploading the emissions inventory data, which is the snapshot data. So in the import, we select emissions inventory data, and in the format, we select Cirrus 2.4 CRF format. I've included all of this in the supporting document. And then you can select overwrite. It doesn't matter if you haven't entered anything before, but it's good to overwrite because then you are confident that all of the data is consistent with the file you've received. So then you click OK. Now, what you do is you get a little update, success, total data points. This mapping here, it'll be roughly the same for everyone else. There may be a small variation in the number of data points that are transferred, but essentially this has now uploaded the file. And yeah, you're done. You can also export your responses if you want to see what they look like. So I'd recommend just exporting all pages. It's quite a handy little file. Gives you a good summary about all the different things, not just the inventory data, but all the other fields as well. And that will then confirm that the transfer has taken place. So that's the process. Is that good? Yeah.
That's what we wanted to do. We were beforehand checking it out to make sure it was one click. It was mainly one click.
It was a couple of clicks.
You just got rid of eventually. It might say there, I think 1 or 2 questions answered, but just again, so everyone realizes, and I guess you can jump in there if you like, when you do it, there's 100 different questions that have just been done within one fell swoop.
Yes, that is handy. And I would emphasize as well, so the benefits are really pretty good. So firstly, obviously it's administratively a lot easier, but also it means like we've worked with lots of submissions of councils to CDP and the likes, and the vast majority, like 95% plus of issues that we work through resolving are just fields being entered incorrectly. Like the information was there, something wasn't quite typed in right, or a drop down wasn't selected or something. And so this can remove all of those issues. And so it really is, it presents a lot of benefits of going through this approach. So I might stop sharing. Does that sound okay? All right.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Jess.
Thank you so much, Matt and Lex. Yeah, really fantastic just to hear about how this is also now saving councils, really adding that 100 different data points just in one simple file. So we do have a question which is from Anne Gibbons. Anne, do you want to ask your question directly to Lex? Thanks.
Sure. Hi, Lex. How are you?
Good, Anne. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Yeah, I was just, you know how when we went collaboratively together, the councils in SA to sort out the snapshot data, I was just wondering if there's been any conversations either through Andrew Nesbitt, who's now in the LGA, or with the SA government about having this type of program available to all SA councils more broadly?
Yeah, good question. So I've caught up and met Andrew at the Alliances conference on Friday, which was great to see and great to meet him. Firstly, this particular thing here works for everyone around Australia. So if you want to report now, it's done. You can do what Matt just showed you, or you can just say, no, you do it just in case it stuffs up, and we'll do it all for you. And so I guess this is a classic case. I guess when I talked at the start about, that whole lift one, lift all, it's now once we go through this process and, play around and we put it into, these kind of data processes or developing these tools, this is now for everyone. So it doesn't matter where you are, all 537 councils around Australia. I think one of the things though around so it's already set up for you. It's set up for everyone. It's basically, I think sometimes there are big things where we go out and we try and seek funding for big improvements or big changes that might cost 40, 50, 120, 250 grand. Having a whiz-bang database and dashboard that had all the actions within Australia, we could go and see if Mike Cannon Brooks wants to give 2 million and we'd be able to have something for everyone set up. every now and then we find things like this, where the previous, I don't know if we've done it with you, but we've done it with a lot of people here. The previous process is often councils would start to it and they'd get frustrated and ask us, we'd get frustrated, but we might, do it and then use the data behind the scenes. We had like lots of Excel spreadsheets. And so it was often about, we would provide a quote to a council, depending on where we're at, it might be a couple of grand, it might be up to $3,000, because there's a lot of work trying to get the data sources in and then putting it up and then getting all these errors that we didn't put in properly, back and forth, etc. But because internally at Ironbark, we've changed some of our systems, Matt and the team, to make it easier to export, means that we were able to then work with CDP through ICLEI to try and have this process where we've got the tool and the system mapped. So that is now available for everyone. The one thing to note, that a lot of the points I mentioned before around the data accuracy and granularity is an ongoing discussion. In Victoria, the minister announced on Friday at the conference that they're supporting Snapshot to incorporate more accuracy and granularity. And I think we might have or had someone from Delp on the line here before, and Matt's involved in this project, which will help with the front end. So on Snapshot, for example, I don't know exactly how it's going to look, but as well as just electricity and then residential, commercial, industrial, you'll be able to go the next steps down. However, we still have the challenge across Australia that original data often comes from state or federal sources and is then scaled down to the municipal level. And so there is another bit of work there that will include and require advocacy to get that data and unlock it from key organisations. Traditionally, it was distribution businesses. So yes, potentially in SA, if Andrew and the LGA could work with you guys to say to SAPN, this is the document and this is the data we want, and we can send you a 2 or 3 pager that outlines exactly what that is. We don't want the data, share it with everyone. We don't really care. It can be for everything and everyone, but we want access to it so we can put it onto Snapshot, and you will then have what's called tier 2 or real data. So that's what we're doing and what we're trying to do in Victoria as well. But the gatekeepers are not being very helpful.
All right, thanks so much, Lex. We have another question from Julia Carey. Julia, do you want to jump on to ask your question, or?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I don't have a video.
No worries.
I'm from the sustainability team at Byron Shire Council, and we've been doing the ICLEI CDP reporting for a few years. And I know that I've mentioned in a couple of previous ICLEI ones, when it comes to reporting the data, we do really struggle because the entry function, like the way that they're labelled, it doesn't match Australian reporting functions, I guess. I can't think of an example off the top of my head. But I was wondering, with this new snapshot feature, will that also solve council operational reporting issues as well? Are our council operations inclusive in this snapshot data?
Let me answer first, and then I'll pass on to Matt as well. The first response is yes, it is a subsector of the snapshot data. Oh, maybe not. So when you put your council's corporate emissions, operational emissions, are generally 1-2% of the community-wide emissions, and so they are incorporated there. So if you were to add up all the 537 odd profiles within Australia, it's not like all the local government emissions are not there. So for example, at Byron, your electricity for your leisure centres and town halls, whatever else is all captured there depending on the methodology, but it's not separated out. And so there's nothing that has, for example, just the, I'm not sure whether that's something, I think that is something that you can do within CDP ICLEI track. You can report just your operational emissions separately. It's not like a corporate operational inventory that also breaks down council's emissions according to streetlights, building types of buildings, or something like that. Different thing. Matt, am I right?
I think you may be technically right, but it probably isn't answering her question directly. So in regards to facilitating the submission of the corporate specific emissions, that's not part of this update. This update is for the municipal updates, but we actually, I was just doing an overview of the update process and what opportunities we're available to expand functionality as well into other reporting areas. And we have quite a large number of additional reporting areas that we can submit on. So I will be talking with, like, now that we have this base element of the municipal emissions supported, I'll be working with ICLEI and with CDP about looking to expand the number of areas that can be reported with essentially through exactly the same process and at the same time. So there will be some options coming available. The submission of the corporate emissions is probably not something that'll happen in the immediate future because it's collected via different channels. But we could definitely liaise with ICLEI about ensuring concordances with local naming conventions at the very least, so that it removes any confusion you have.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I guess, if I wanted to go bare minimum, I could actually just submit the snapshot data, and that would kind of, include our operational emissions from the big picture side of things. But if I wanted to get down into the details, I would still need to go through the painstaking process of filling out the CDP forms. But something like the naming conventions, I think, would be really helpful, because definitely in the past, when I've tried my hardest filling out the CDP questionnaire, it still then spits out this answer at the end that's not reflective of what we actually are achieving at our council. And I think that it's because they've got to try and, include naming conventions and, functionality for all over the world, of course, but it's frustrating nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be happy to take a look at that. Yeah, it sounds like a combination of name conventions and potentially coefficient attributions. So yeah, really happy to explore that.
Thank you. Excellent, thanks, Julie, and also Matt for offering to explore that further with us. Certainly really helps having this feedback to shape this system. So we just have also a comment or questions from Matt Adams. Firstly is just to that we will share the full post once you've clicked submit button, what happens to the data. So it does actually open up after you've pressed the submit, so that you can actually review the data properly, and then you can go back into the survey and address the other components. And it's very important, of course, that you do go back into the survey and take those further steps to make sure that you have a holistic report. So Monica, I see your question. Do you want to ask that one?
Yes, hello, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly.
Yes, good, thank you. My reception is not the best. Look, I'm totally new to this whole thing. There was a council resolution that we go and do ICLEI reporting. And hence my question is probably coming from someone who has no understanding about the whole thing. Is probably a bit naive, but I would be still like to understand that. So this snapshot will, if I understood that right, will answer some, so 100 out of 285 questions or so. But what the EOI with the two options, with the two costs, either us receiving the CSV format or get the whole thing done, I just can't understand how the two fit together. So if we have snapshot, why do we need another option? And I guess what Julia said, the other 100 points which are outstanding, I assume that will be then our council emissions. Is that correct? Thank you.
I can start and then Jess, hand back to you. I don't know the other 180 points. It's probably things like your council name and adaptation and resilience and vulnerability and energy security and all these things. So I guess firstly, what this does is, snapshot is, and it's a totally fine to, Monica, if you're new to it, people that have been around for 10 years would still struggle with this. It's really confusing. I put in the chat link there a little document that basically tries to unpack the way a lot of these things fit together. Snapshot is basically just it shows a lot of the reporting, a lot of the data. It's at a high level. It shows you what your inventory is at Alexandria, your community emissions profile, and it's been a 5 or 6 year process to develop that data, even longer than that, mainly through colleague Matt and working with the likes of Bernie over the years and Steve to try and make sure that that data was verified according to the global standard, which is called the GPC protocol. If you want to report though, you can't just go and get snapshot and get those high level numbers, you know, electricity, residential, industrial, commercial, gas, transport, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I don't know, perhaps that's changed and you can, but traditionally you need to actually fill in, other people have mentioned the Cirrus form, there was the CCR, the Carbon Climate Registry, and you would have to fill in an Excel spreadsheet that had a lot more data sets. And so councils would do that by themselves. City of Melbourne, Sydney, a lot of councils, you know, a lot of the bigger councils, others would call out for help. And so we would do it on a consultancy basis for, let's say, $3,000. What this is doing is, behind the scenes, it would be $3,000 because it was costly for us to actually then do that whole thing on your behalf or on a council's behalf, navigating through Cirrus. What Matt just showed you there in 10 minutes would often take 20 hours because you would go back and check things, or you would get responses back saying this isn't working, and there's a lot of data that had to be developed. And so that's the big change, is that now that's available if you want to do it yourself that way. Or sorry, if you want to use the back end snapshot data, it will automatically go into the right fields. It's definitely not free at the moment. It will be free, or it would be free if another party would come to the table and fund it for everybody. And then we would happily much prefer it. It's not really a great model to have councils kind of paying individually for these sort of things. And Snapshot's a good example. In the past, even in just the developing of those profiles themselves, councils would come to us and pay $4 or $5,000 for a profile. And then we finally had State of Victoria, DPI or OEHCC, sorry, Matt Adams, forgotten your acronym now, who funded Snapshot and totally contributed to Snapshot, why I keep them front and center at every presentation, because they're the ones that basically said, let's just get together, get the data together and make this available for all. And so it's through those processes that we've been able to do this. What this is basically is saying, if you want that CSV spreadsheet, we will generate it for you. We've got to do a few things internally. There's a fair bit of, I guess, quite happy to just explain sunk costs that go into this sort of stuff. We don't want to just charge the first few councils the expensive amount that it costs to do it, and then charge those later that come down the track nothing because it's easier. And so we're just keeping it at an amount that's kind of recovery, like a cost recovery kind of mode. Really importantly here though, once you get that CSV format, you are totally on your own. And that's why we've got that other option to say we'll do it, because as Jess pointed out as well, and I'm sure anyone that's used it before, and having used it before ourselves, you go back in and check a few things, or you make a few changes and it doesn't work. You will have to pay us if you want us to actually help you with it, because it would take, we're so used to doing it, it just often just takes so much more time to do than expected. So that's the difference between those. And equally, members, are supporting the most, critical global network of local governments around Australia, working on these things, doing these things behind the scenes. That's about 30% of the whole entire equity membership for some councils, I think, in there. So, jump on board and become an equity member like you guys have, which is great. As far as the other questions, I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, and also, Monica, in terms of how we look at this globally as well, then whilst it could be tempting to say, oh, we've got Snapshot and here's the emissions profiles for the state government, for the local governments across Australia, that is different to then the global system. So you could imagine if there was, if every country had a different Snapshot, would have over 190 separate pieces, which would defeat the purpose, and instead of having a globally unified reporting system. And hence why you do need to still translate this information about your emissions reporting into the globally connected system. And of course, as Matt was saying earlier, we would love to be able to expand that to automate other areas of data, but it will just take certainly local governments prioritising these sorts of efficiencies in your requests to state and federal governments to get that work financed. So I hope
That makes sense. No, that's just fantastic. Now, one other question. So it's an annual reporting, is that correct? And when is that happening? Because if I now become an ICLEA member, it would be best to do this when the new cycle starts, right?
Excellent. So the new cycle has just started. And so it would be perfectly timely for you to pledge to the Global Covenant. And we can also then support you as ICLEI in that process.
Thank you.
Excellent. Wonderful. Thanks, Monica. Great you could join today. So the next question would be, where are we up to? From Laura Campbell. Laura, are you still here?
Yep. Hi.
Hi, Laura.
Hi.
Ask
yeah,
away.
I was wondering, we don't currently do any reporting externally, and we're not, we're a very small council, and I don't think there's much appetite to sign up for ICLEI, but we have signed up for Cities Power Partnership, and I'm just wondering, like, what other avenues for reporting might there be? Do you know if there's anything through the CPP? I was just looking at NGA. Is there anything, do other local governments report elsewhere?
I guess firstly, you don't have to be an ICLEI member to report or be part of GCoM to do this. And so I totally understand, councils are in different boats, and that makes sense. Especially, Murrindindi, it's a small regional council, so appreciate that's a challenge. But you can start an account on CDP and report yourself if you like for no cost. You can join the Global Covenant of Mayors at no cost, just bearing in mind that there are certain requirements such as reporting. And in my take has always been that, the development of action plans, which you need to do, and setting a target, which you need to do, has always been quite straightforward because most councils have done that anyway and they can submit that. But it's weird, this has been the one that's been the challenge for Australian councils, that kind of first step, the inventory or the profile. So it doesn't cost you to do that. But yeah, there is a cost involved at the moment for this process anyway, for the profile development, for the CSV. But look, maybe we can have a chat as well, Jess and others offline, to see, like in the past, Laura, like before you were at council, when we worked with ICLEI 10, 12 years ago on developing SEEP applications for community energy efficiency programs with business cases, we would just offer discounts to rural and regional councils to try and, bring them in and play our own little socialism game and getting the more cashed up councils to pay. Cities Power Partnership are moving in this direction a little bit more. And again, one of the best things I've seen in the local government landscape over the last 2 years has been the way those key networks are now working together and talking a lot. So Jess and myself and others will be meeting with CPP in the next few weeks, as we do frequently through Better Future Australia. And the other link, and this is where, again, be loud about this and talk about this as something that we would hopefully want to do or could do through Cities Power Partnership. We can all advocate to them openly about incorporating reporting for them, seeing if they can get funding perhaps to try and make this thing we're doing now free for everyone, because what it will mean down the track is it will be easier to advocate to the federal government to say this is what councils are doing if we've got that platform. Sure, we could develop reports like we've done in the past saying, add up all the targets and here's where we're at. But if it's actually done through these official global programs and reporting platforms, it's much easier to do that advocacy.
Yeah, thanks, Lex. And just to add to that, so as Lex said, we're all collaborating and just trying to figure out, okay, how do we play on each other's strengths? Certainly CPP has got a fantastic resources in terms of, solutions and technical support on mitigation, very much specifically. It is something that is, of course, only offered to Australia. And so therefore, what an important role that ICLEI and the Global Covenant play is that locally connected data and reporting into the global system. So so we are and have discussed looking at a webinar later in the year, which would help to sort of frame how the different initiatives fit together and work together, as well as what future opportunities there could be for better collaboration. So it's a bit of a work in progress at the moment. Anyway, we're just at 2 minutes to 2, which is our closing time. So is there any other burning questions that someone would love to have one of us answer?
There's one that you might be able to answer, Laura, about what else local governments report on and is CDP. Are there other places that you can report?
Oh, sorry, to me?
Yeah, or Matt might know as well. What else you report on the CDP?
Yeah, so in terms of other places to report, CDP is, I think the really crucial global reporting system. If you're signed up to the Cities Race to Zero Global Covenant of Mayors or to ICLEI, these all do channel into the same system. And therefore we then have globally comparable data, which is really important. I'm not aware of other systems that would be global, only more the sub-regional things. Excellent. Great. So thank you all very much. It has been a pleasure to have you all join us today. There is other Global Covenant of Mayors webinars taking place over the next week. And so there is one tomorrow for Oceania region at 4 p.m, which does go more broadly into sort of the why you would be part of the Global Covenant of Mayors and steps through the various changes that have been made to the questionnaire. So if you were really looking for that sort of more detail in the questionnaire, please do go through and join that webinar tomorrow. And thank you all very much for joining. Thank you so much to Snapshot. Thanks so much to Lex.
Right.
And
Matt's going to change his name actually
to Snapshot. Yeah, great. Thank you so much to Lex and Matt and Ironbark as a whole, because I think the work that they have done is really critical to helping provide these efficiencies. And everyone have a wonderful day. Cheers.
Thanks, Jess.
Thanks. Bye.